Welcome to this installment of Brave New World on ContextTV. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming revolution in retail and how and why 2020 will usher in the decade where it's going to be e-commerce's golden era. So I took a look at some stats and I was actually surprised. Back in 2010, so a decade ago, e-commerce represented only 4% of total retail sales in the US. By mid-decade in 2015, it crept up to 7%. And we finished the decade at about 11% at the end of 2019. If you're wondering about the big dominant player, Amazon, so Amazon's market share in e-commerce is just over 50%. If you're wondering, Walmart is about 5%. And Amazon's share of total retail is only about 5%. So these numbers, when they're further broken down, e-commerce is actually the fourth tranche of all retail. The first one is motor vehicle and parts at 20%, then food and beverage at 12%, then restaurants and bars at 12%, with e-commerce at 11%, general merchandise at 11%, as well as gasoline at 8%. So if you just look at that pie and then you think of the impact of COVID, think of the impact it's going to have on food and beverage sales. The amount of purchasing that people used to make going to the store that they will make through e-commerce. Think of restaurants and bars. That market share is going to shrink, frankly. So e-commerce is going to be radically bigger on a relative basis and absolute basis in the years to come. You know, that line about Lenin, war serves as the accelerator of history and events. The same will be said about COVID. So let's break it down into some tactical ways that that's going to change. If before you were a company like L'Oreal or Gap and you were in a management meeting, you would be thinking and spending a lot of time in that meeting about your retail presence. And frankly, because real estate and rent is so expensive, you would probably be allocating a large part of your budget to rent. That is going to change. Why? Because pound for pound, you get a better return on your dollars by thinking of e-commerce and online and digital media and fulfillment through the web. So that's going to accelerate dramatically. There's always politics in management. There's politics in decision making. Right now, retail is in the corner because with physical distancing, we don't even know when there's a return to normalcy. Then, think of advertising. If you had the same status quo, the upfronts, going to Cannes, to boondoggles, the greasing of the wheel, the schmoozing that goes into television advertising, which, quoting Eric Schmidt, former chairman of Google, is the last bastion of unaccountability in corporate America. All of a sudden, you no longer have that old way of doing things. You're just going to be shifting a lot more of your ad dollars to digital. For that reason, whereas in the near term, obviously, Facebook and Google that are heavily reliant on advertising are probably going to face some headwinds. Long term, I think those companies are going to benefit disproportionately because a lot of the ad dollars are going to shift to digital at a much faster rate. But even all of their other initiatives in fintech and health, things that were these just moonshot ideas that maybe would have faced a lot of resistance over fears of monopoly and just over fears of and not just fears, just over existing competitive forces who are going to be struggling. COVID is going to open things up wide open for Google and Facebook. But the clear winner right now is Amazon. This year alone, in 2020, COVID's impact to Amazon is going to be $4 billion extra of revenue. Now, granted, they have to make a lot of investments, so I'm not sure if those are going to be profitable dollars in the near term. But Amazon is clearly going to be the winner here. But COVID is going to change a lot of other things. It's not just that, oh, we're not going to spend big dollars on a Times Square presence, but even existing facilities are going to be dramatically changed. I think if you think of the Costco experience, going to pharmacies, going to grocery stores, there's going to be a lot more curb pickup. Layouts are going to change. The reality is that we're just going to be kind of shocked and freaking out over physical distancing. So I don't think that many consumers even want to be near one another. And the convenience of just ordering online, it's different if certain goods you may want to go and touch and feel, but if I'm buying toilet paper and Windex and deodorant, I don't really need to touch it. I just basically am fine to order it. So I think layouts of stores are going to change and existing stores are probably already being thought of being reconfigured. Finally, anecdotally, You saw that screen grab from Jim Cramer's show where it showed best week in the stock market since 1938, and at the bottom it said something like 15 million people are unemployed. Does the stock market want death, destruction, unemployment? I'm going to do a separate video on that, but briefly, no. I think well, yes and no. But the main reason why the stock market does well in that moment is because there's less uncertainty. You start to figure and get your head around what the numbers are going to look like. The more uncertainty in a market, the less well the stock market generally performs. But let's be honest, what that conveys, two things, is there will be less resistance when decision makers want to embrace automation, when they want to introduce artificial intelligence to replace a lot of jobs. The reality is it was going to be very distasteful to say, hey, sorry, Mr. or Mrs. Cashier, but we're going to have to replace you because now a robot can do this job. There won't be any more resistance. And two, let's face it, with all of these extra unemployed in the workforce, the reality is that corporations do like that to have control on inflationary pressure on wages. Basically, there's more unemployed people. That does favor employers. It's not pleasant to say that, but yes, that's how the stock market looks at that. But the fundamental takeaway is some jobs will simply just not return. That's just a fact. And two, some people will move into other jobs. And generally speaking, I think that shift, we started off breaking down e-commerce, will be a shift towards e-commerce, which right now is at 11%. But if you had to forecast where it would be by 2030, easily it might be anywhere above 25 and maybe even closer to 33, if not 40, 50% of total sales.